Hello, everybody. I had an insight recently into the younger Bobby Fischer that I wanted to share, and this came from studying Svetozar Gligorich's book, I Play Against Pieces, and his annotated game from 1960 about Fischer. And this is the end position that we're gonna go through. Something that interests me in general is what is the difference between a player who is, let's say, number 10 in the world, number 12, and the very top? And what was the difference for Fischer then in 1960, when he's about 17, to the very top players? I think in Fischer's mind, he deserved to be the very best, and he created then a narrative that the Soviets were cheating against him, which they were. We know because Korchnoi later told us, but he used that narrative as an escape for his own ego as to why he wasn't at the very top, when in fact there were very much chess reasons that were keeping him from the top. And as we'll see, they're not so much like skill in terms of your natural talent or anything like that, but rather chess maturity. And so we're going to use this game as a key example. If we look at this picture that I found on a site called Chess Metrics, you can see the progress of the top players in 1960, and Bobby there is number 12, and maybe gets up to number 10 or so by the end of the year. So very much somebody who's trying to break into the top, not somebody who's already at the top. Okay, so let's take a look at this very interesting game here. And something we're going to see is that even though Bobby starts with a Nimzo, he is really, of course, a King's Indian player, and he's going to try to turn this into a King's Indian player. And that's one of the problems that he's going to have in this game, is his inflexibility with the structure. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, many different ways to meet this opening setup. And Bobby is going to play this, bishop d6, e5. And we're going to see that this, I think, appealed to him from a chess point of view, because it will have the ability to turn into a very King's Indian-like position. Okay, something I need to get into a little bit here is the preconceptions of both players at this point in time. I think of the top players in the world then, and that is that everyone really thought that this position would basically be not only fine for black, but better for black. And it's important to see in human terms why you might believe that. The bishop is cut. The play on the queen side, not clear what it's going to be, and black's knights are going to start hopping all over the white king side. And like in a King's Indian, the pawn structure is basically going to be pointing toward the king. Now, just a key difference that happens in the development of chess is you turn on the computer and the computer's like, you know what, I really love white space advantage. Just play a move like h3 and you're going to be fine. But I have to say, through human eyes, the thing that's so terrifying is that it's not clear what white's plan is over there on the queen side, which is really where you'd think about white's side of the board being. And that this thing where white doesn't play e4 and black not being afraid of it is a key thing that we're going to need to understand to understand what happens next. All right, now with that said, I really want to say that is not my critique on Fischer's game here, because both players, the top players in the world, thought that that was a problem for white if he committed e4 too early. And you can see that in Bobby's next move. He had a previous game against Taimanov prior to this, where it went bishop d6, e4, e5, bishop e3, and here you can see the intention of h3 by both Gligorich and Taimanov, which is to not play d5, to avoid playing d5 and keep the censor fluid. So b5 is played by Fischer, and Gligerich even gives it a exclam. Of course, he's not using the computer in his notes. And one key problem, although I don't think b5 is a bad move, one key problem that it's going to present is once you play b5, it's going to be controversial if you revert back to the King's Indian plan, because you have now weakened yourself on the queen side. And in the King's Indian attack structure, generally you want the bishop here on this diagonal, not on this diagonal. All right, so let's look at how things go. Bishop d3, bishop e2 is also a thought. Queen e2. And here, to me, for sure, knight b4 and c5 should be played. Feels roughly equal if you imagine this position. Maybe, it might be annoying that e4 restricts some of our pieces, but this guy is also problematic. So, to my mind, a roughly equal position. But Fischer is going to focus in on this plan. Of course, e4, e4 at any point is going to be a thing. Bishop b1, and there we should mention there is now it's getting a little bit more difficult. If you imagine like this, and we've got threats of knight d5. So that is no longer such a thing. And bishop b1, of course, a move that's like, oh, I don't know. e5, d5. Now, bear in mind, what happens here is that in Gligerich's mind and in Fischer's mind, it's a big thing that white doesn't commit e4 so that he can keep this scope open and maybe use it for a knight. And it's here where Bobby plays a move that I really just makes me want to cry. It's so weird and nasty. He plays knight d8, and it makes me cringe. My sense is that, especially if e4 isn't going to come, or if that's not what we're afraid of, that knight b8 should be played, and we'll put our knight on d7, and maybe we'll play c6. But basically, the knight is going to be much more harmonious with the rest of the position. So knight d8, for sure white should play e4. I mean, at this point, especially now, the clue should be, oh, the knight is on d8. That thing is terrible. Let's keep it terrible. And that's what I think in this next move, you really sense Gligerich's aversion to e4, and he plays knight g5. Now, if this is the case, if white really has to do this, it's the only way that makes knight d8 sensible. And I think both players maybe even thought that this was the continuation that was coming. So let's take a look. And hallelujah, Fischer has come to what seems to be the promised land. He's come to a King's Indian structure. Let's note, though, that there's some key problems. The bishop on b7 is misplaced. It's hitting a rock on d5, and just in general, you want that bishop looking over here to conduct your attack. The knight is funky as well. So Gligerich plays the right move. Makes sense anyway. Let's start opening up the queen side, right? And here is the beginning of the truly bad moves that I think I'm going to try to put like this. After forcing his King's Indian structure, in this position I would say white's better, but in a lot of King's Indian positions white's better, but you're practically compensated for that betterness, if you will, by the fact that you have practical opportunities against the king. And here, though, Bobby really makes some chess crimes, which have to do, to me, with the harmony of the white pieces. The black pieces is really going to get ugly now. So from my human perspective, when I was studying this game, I thought, well, let's just go back with c8. We need to cover this pawn before we play knight f7. The only way knight d8, of course, makes sense is that you're dreaming of playing knight f7 someday. So Bobby's move, rook f6, really pretty ugly. And what I think you see is a King's Indian player's natural need to push with the initiative on the king's side. But it's not ready, my friend. No. And my human take on this position was white should play f4 here. I really like this move. You are trying to open things up for the bishops in particular, well, both of them. And if black ever plays e4, the knight is just dead. It's dead from f7. It's not going anywhere. And if you let me start opening things, well, that's what we want. I need to rip the position open for the bishops, and I want to make this, any kind of rook g6 stuff, not so hot because my queen protects her man laterally. So let's say Gligorich, it's not a bad move, but it really gives Fischer a little chance here. E4, B4. This was clearly the intention of rook c4, to play b4 after getting the rook on the c file. I looked at queen c2, but maybe black has, maybe he's got enough. To me, it really still looks nasty with the pieces so discombobulated over there. But let's look at the game. b4, knight f7, bishop b2, and now a real screamer of a move. Rook g6. Of course you've got to play knight e5, buddy. What are you doing? There's no way you're going to make this work with so few pieces over there. And here, Gligorich makes an inaccuracy. It has the right spirit, but it's an inaccuracy. He should again play f4 and say, well, if you don't take me, I'm dominating you completely because the knight is just cut and the rook really isn't doing anything once my queen has established connection with this pawn. So f4, definitely, I'd say strategically winning. And we'll look at ef because that's what's going to happen in the game. But this is another screamer, ef. After that, white's bishops are completely ripping open the position, and black has two pieces that really aren't playing at all. So in this position, either queen h4 or knight g5, you at least are kind of sort of still in the game. But after you take, oh man, that's a screamer of a bad move. And now queen f3, I gotta be lost. Gotta be lost. Bishop f5, I'm sure there were other moves as well. And Gligorich has this whole thing worked out. Rook e4, the move he had calculated when he plays bishop f5. So the summary I want to give is, to me, this is a great example of how someone very talented is playing immature moves. Moves which aren't thinking about the position in a sensible way. And what I mean by that is he's forcing the ideas of the King's Indian onto positions they shouldn't be forced at, and doesn't sense the danger when he should have. And that sense of danger is so critical at every level, but especially at the very top. And so I think it was tournaments like this in the early 60s which pushed him away from chess. And then, of course, he goes a little crazy. He goes into some little holes in Pasadena and other weird places in the United States. A lot of us don't really know exactly where he disappears to. I think he's studying chess in this time. But also getting a little conspiratorial, and that accounts for a lot of the later weirdness that we see. And part of that weirdness is that by 1970, when he lists his top 10 players in the world, he actually says that Gligorich is one of them, which Gligorich is a great player, but definitely not one of the top 10 players of all time. I shouldn't have said in the world, because that implies at that time, but he said of all time. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Please remember to subscribe. And I did let's call it a companion lecture about Fischer and his unwillingness to play with the space advantage. That I did that for the St. Louis Chess Club. I'll link that below in the description, but I guess that could be considered a companion video to this one. All right, bye-bye.